From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Do you think Instagram is addictive? You might have a teenager in your life, endlessly scrolling late into the night, haunted by the impossible beauty standards, plagued perhaps by notifications during school hours, or maybe they're consumed by YouTube, Snapchat or TikTok, losing hours and hours down an algorithmic black hole of mind-mushing drivel. Well, 2026 could be the start of some kind of reckoning.
We are following breaking news on a potentially historic settlement in the ongoing legal fight over social media's impact on teens.
Meta has agreed to a massive settlement of nearly $17 billion with a bipartisan group of 52 attorneys general.
This is the largest settlement against big tech in American history by far.
Meta, who own Facebook, Instagram, and those strange little sunglasses that film people, has settled a case brought against it by a coalition of US states. They've denied wrongdoing, but have agreed to hand over $18 billion and to make sweeping changes to their platforms, to the absolute delight of some parents.
I'm very pleased. There's lots of lawsuits coming for these companies, lots of parents. And yeah, I'm satisfied. I feel like there's justice is possible.
They might have settled this particular trial though, but they haven't settled the question. Are these changes really going to solve all the issues? Will other platforms get involved too? And what about the other legal cases looming? Isn't this fight really just beginning? The story today, inside Big Tech's $18 billion reality check.
I'm Danny Forston. I'm the West Coast correspondent covering all things tech out here in Silicon Valley for the Sunday Times.
And before we get into actually what happened and what the settlement was, I mean, were you surprised? Was it a shock, or were you expecting all of this?
I wasn't expecting it. You know, the thing about Meta, they've been pretty combative. Kind of that's their stance and has been for years and years and years. You know, this is not a company that backs down ever. So, you know, I could see the direction of travel, and it seemed quite clear that something like this would have to come at some point, but I was surprised that they decided to do this. You know, I think it was only 4 days of trial before they struck this deal.
And just remind us exactly, what is this case? Who was bringing it and why?
Yeah, so this was 4 state attorneys general representing about 60 million people. So it's California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey. But they were representing dozens of other states who had brought similar claims. And it was actually a pretty narrow legal case. And what they're arguing is that, look, you say, Meta, that your products are safe, that is your top priority, that's what you care about, and that is the thing you tell the internet going public. But in reality, you know that these things are dangerous, that they are addictive, that they are harming people. And so it was a pretty clear kind of argument saying, hey, you're saying your products are one thing, but when in fact they are another. And then they went to court to prove that. And of course, they were looking for, initially, the figure was over $1 trillion, which was then dramatically reduced, you know, once they started talking about it in court. But it was still, they were looking for up to nearly $200 billion in damages from the company.
Ouch. And what is the charge to Meta in terms of actually why or how these platforms are addictive or bad, particularly for young people?
Yeah, so it's worth keeping in mind, you know, the social media industry, if you go back, 2004 was when Facebook was founded. So we're, 22 years into the social media era as we know it. And throughout, them and the entire industry has said, hey, we're just a platform. We're protected by something called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act in America. And it says, look, hey, this is a shield. We just host people's views. We cannot be held liable for what you or I or anyone else says on our platform. We are just, the town square, so to speak. And what these attorneys general argued was like, hey, no, you are actually designing these products to be addictive. This is not an accident. This is deliberate. You are trying to lure people in from a very, very young age. And because the longer you have somebody on Facebook, Instagram, whatever, the more what they call lifetime value you hold for the company. They'll put a number on it. If you start in your teens, you could be worth over the life of your, usage of the app, over $300 to that company. So they want millions and millions and millions of teens on the app, no matter how they can get them. And that was the argument that the states were making. It should be said, Meta, even with this settlement, has denied any wrongdoing. And obviously that was what they were arguing in court.
And we have seen quite a number of cases actually go through the courts or approach the courts to do with social media platforms and the perceived harms that they're meant to be doing to particularly young people. This one, though, has been described as a landmark case, and so much attention and weight has been placed on this one. Why is that?
If you humor me, a little bit of context, if you go back to February and March, there was another case, and it was the first of its kind. In state court in Los Angeles, it was brought by a young woman who was 20 years old at the time. And it was a personal injury case. And again, it was kind of making a similar argument. She kind of laid out how she started getting on social media when she was 6 years old and explained on the stand in court how all of these apps kind of worsened, exacerbated, caused all kinds of mental health, body dysmorphia struggles throughout her life. So it's a straightforward product liability case. And she won against Meta and YouTube. TikTok and Snapchat settled out of court before it began. And that was the first kind of chink in the armor of the social media industry. It was the first case, product liability case, that made it all the way to the court, the very first one, and the plaintiff won. So that was the first glimpse of what I keep referring to as like the snowball starting to roll down the mountain and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so if you fast forward to this case, this is not a single teenager struggling with mental health. These were 4 attorneys general representing 60 million people seeking hundreds of billions of dollars of damages. So just the scale of it and the kind of legal heft behind it was, quantitatively and qualitatively different.
And the amazing thing is, as you've already mentioned and alluded to, is this trial in this case did start. We did have a number of days of evidence. What did you hear that interested you? What happened?
This case goes back to 2023. The other case in LA went back years. And so what you have seen in the kind of run-up to as these cases start to finally go to trial is that there has been years of what they call discovery, which is you are ordered to produce X, Y, or Z documents, emails, reports, whatever it may be, things that maybe the other side doesn't want you to see. Those have all now made it into the public domain. So the same kind of expert witness that the plaintiff in LA relied on, he's a whistleblower. His name is Arturo Bejar. He worked at Instagram for many years on teen safety. He was the expert witness in the case in LA, and he was the first witness that the states brought in this case last week. And again, he's presenting effectively the same picture, the same story, the same evidence. And when you talk to advocates and parents who have lost children, other people who have filed cases, they're saying, look, one of the victories here, regardless of what happens in the court, is that all of this stuff is now in the public domain.
And then the amazing thing is not only have all of that information disclosed, but then have that informed questioning of some of the people who are actually in charge of this kind of stuff at the moment. Like the head of Instagram was on the stand.
That's right. Adam Mosseri, he took the stand earlier this week. And again, they're saying, look, we have put in place dozens and dozens and dozens of safety features, which is true. But then you hear from someone like Arturo Bejar, who was, right on the coalface of implementing these things. And he's like, they are designed to be difficult to use. They are hard to find. You have to go through multiple screens to actually implement a change. Yes, they kind of exist, but for your typical user, they won't know how to find them, how to use them. They're safety theater, effectively.
Would it be unfair of us to suggest that the reason this settlement came about and we didn't get the full extent of the trial that you and others were expecting is because Mark Zuckerberg was due to take the stand, and this settlement kiboshes that? He doesn't have to now sit there in that court and answer some of those questions about some of those issues and others.
I don't think so. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has testified in Congress countless times. He's been in court several times before. He has a script, he sticks to it. So it might be a bit uncomfortable for him, but I don't think that was a driving factor. I think what really is happening here is Meta on its face, very combative. You know, when they're briefing reporters before this trial started, they were very confident. But in the background, clearly, they had already opened negotiations with all of these state attorneys general. And I think if you step back, when you look at the bans that have begun to roll out across the world, starting in Australia, places like Indonesia, Brazil, etc., and restrictions across Europe, especially for teens, the tide is shifting. And I think, rather than go to the wall again, spend 6 weeks fighting this case with the attorneys general, I think they made a choice. $17 billion. It's a lot of money to you and I and to most people. But for Meta, this is a company that's worth $1.5 trillion. They brought in $200 billion last year alone. It is not insignificant, but it is also something that they can wear. And the question is, what happens now?
Just explain for us what was in that settlement, because we keep talking about the money, 17 or 18 billion, but there's a bit of a catch with some of that money in terms of it might not necessarily be that much. And also there's the promise that they're going to make all these changes to their platform in the US for teenagers and young people to make it actually safer for them. What's entailed there?
The changes that they say they're going to implement, there's several. And again, this is restricted to teen users right now. A 2-hour daily usage cap. So theoretically, if you're, 16 years old and you've been on Instagram, we hit 2 hours, it shuts down. They're going to implement a nighttime lockout. So from midnight to 6, you simply cannot access the app. No school day notifications. Critically, they're also going to get rid of like counts, these kind of things that promote people just, social comparison, things like this. How many people liked my post, et cetera. They're getting rid of that. They're getting rid of cosmetic surgery filters, which can dramatically alter what you look like and can lead to all kinds of negative body issues for lots of users. They're also going to try to implement stronger age detection because, of course, one of the big issues that they have long talked about is people lie about their age. Theoretically, you're not supposed to be able to have a social media account until you're at least 13. But there are millions and millions of, 8, 9, 10, 11-year-olds who are on these apps already. So those are just some of the changes. And what's really interesting, this is just Meta. So they strike the settlement. And today in America, and some of the few big papers, including the New York Times, they ran a full-page ad inviting their rivals to sign up to the same changes. They call it an open letter to TikTok and YouTube to join us in supporting teens, kind of urging them publicly to implement the same measures, which is an interesting strategy. And also, as part of the settlement agreed in court, they're holding back about 30% of that $17 billion if the others don't sign on. So there's a legal lever in there that would release more money if YouTube and TikTok eventually sign up to similar measures.
The money, you made the point that it's not necessarily an enormous part of their annual turnover pie. Who's going to get it, and actually how much might be shaken out of them? Well,
so $17 billion, to put it into perspective, is the largest settlement of this kind ever against the tech industry. So, start there. But, a lot of comparison has been made to the 1998 settlement with the tobacco industry, who similarly said for years, nope, our products aren't harmful, they don't cause cancer, what are you guys talking about, et cetera. And then after immense pressure from several state attorneys general, they finally agreed a $200 billion settlement that would be redistributed to states to deal with public health issues that had arisen from tobacco use. That's $200 billion nearly 30 years ago, right? So $17 billion, again, from one company is not huge in that context, but it's still more than any company has ever had to pay for a settlement like this. And it'll be redistributed to the states. And I think it has to do largely with their size, how many, users they have in each state. So states like California will get more money than, say, Montana, which is, really sparsely populated. And they can use that for any number of programs to help with teen mental health, whatever it may be. So it'll be spread around the states.
And with those changes that they're making to their platforms, they're saying this is a new industry standard that they're wanting to set around safety measures. And as you say, they're wanting those other platforms to come on board as well. So they're not an outlier in this. It's just the same across the board. At the moment, of course, I guess this will just be within the United States. Most of the people listening to this will be in the UK. Are we to expect this to affect us at all or not at all?
I would be stunned if they just do this in America. Because again, I think they see the writing on the wall. And America is its biggest market. It's the home market. It's where it makes the most money. So I would expect, the changes that they implement here to propagate, across their apps certainly through the UK and Europe. But again, it's unclear at this point, but it would be hard, I would argue, it would be hard for the company to say, hey, we're going to set a new industry standard to protect American kids, but we're not going to do the same for British kids, for example. I don't see them trying to make that argument, but you never know.
That is a hard sell. But in terms of if this is the industry standard, I mean, obviously it might be pushed further, but to look at it now and say it is widespread and it is rolled out across the world, what do you make of it? And what are some of the sort of commentators and viewers of this that you talk to make of it? Does this seem like a reasonable industry standard?
It's a step in the right direction. And, I've been covering this industry for a long, long time. I have been repeatedly stunned at how inflexible the industry has been when people have asked for basic things like, for example, making teen accounts private by default rather than having them completely open. Anybody can message them, things like that. These are changes that have been made only recently, again, after much outcry and many, many tragedies. And so, it is good, but at the same time, the core algorithm has not changed and under this will not change. Now, critically, one of the things that they've agreed to is to give an option for someone to not have an algorithmic feed. So to not have an algorithm that is reading your intent and analyzing how many seconds you linger on a certain type of photo and then give you more of that. So you will have an option to not have an algorithmic feed, but this gets back to what does that actually look like in the app? How hard is that to implement? Is this a thing that people are even going to be aware of? So I think the proof in the pudding will be in the eating. There's a lot of detail to sort out here, and it's unclear how much teeth this settlement will actually have when it comes to, what the daily experience of using these apps will be like.
Danny, we're discussing the legal issues facing Meta, the Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp owners. This is only one of their ongoing cases. What other legal wranglings are they still in the midst of? I mean, you mentioned that case from Los Angeles about the 20-year-old woman who won against Meta and YouTube, but they're appealing that, aren't they?
They're appealing that case, and I'll just step back to give you the broader kind of sweep of it because it's kind of hard to get your head around. So if there's, say, about 2,600 legal cases in the queue against Meta, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, the big social media companies, and they've been split roughly into two buckets in federal court in Oakland, not far from where I live, and then a separate bucket in the state court down in LA. So these two judges have these two kind of very long queues of cases. And from those queues, from those pots, they have chosen roughly 10, a dozen each that they reckon represent broadly, the legal arguments, which again is around this idea of, are these things addictive? Are they harmful? Should these companies be held liable for making faulty products in the same way that you can sue a car company if they make a bad seatbelt, or a maker of, paracetamol if it's, toxic, something like that. So basically what Meta has done with this settlement is take the state attorneys general kind of chess piece off the board. This has nothing to do with this stream of cases coming in state courts and federal courts brought by individuals, families who have lost their kids, school districts who say they are spending a lot more money on things like teen mental health services that they argue is being caused by the use of these apps. And so if you step back, those cases still continue. And they're all kind of arguing effectively the same thing, which is trying to prove a new legal kind of principle, which is we can sue these companies for making bad products, not even really dipping into what is actually on these apps, so much as the way you have designed them, they are addictive by design, they are damaging by design. And that is what is still facing Meta, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat. And that is where, if they keep losing these cases, that is where I think you could see something like that 1998 big tobacco settlement, where we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in a settlement and big changes to how the whole industry operates.
But of course, they'd want to try and, maybe like they've done with the case we were talking about a moment ago, where Meta just settled, try and get ahead of it, put in a minimum amount of changes that might see these challenges off, but without taking a massive bite into the revenue they generate from these apps and how they work.
That's right. And, it's not every state has agreed to this deal. For example, Florida's attorney general came out yesterday, just hours after this news broke, and said, look, we were not party to this. This is basically a slap on the wrist. This is a sellout. We are taking Meta to trial. We have great evidence. We have a great case. We are going for the social media industry. We are not going to strike a deal. So that just gives you a little bit of flavor of this is, again, they've taken a big chess piece off the board, but there's a lot of the game still to be played.
And also, well, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I mean, the US has this, to British ears, crackers system where you have, prosecutors, attorneys general basically are elected officials and stand on platforms and things. Where does this whole issue fall into the great big culture war or political divide?
It's one of these rare things where it has bipartisan support. Because again, if you step back, we're 20 plus years into the social media era. And I think more and more people are coming to the realization that we made a generational mistake. Handing kids a smartphone and not really engaging on what that meant, right? I always think about the analogy of like a park. If you go to a park, at least here in the States, there'll be like the little kids' playground with the little slides and everything's plastic and soft. And then there's the big kids' playground where it's like the slides are a bit steeper, the bars are a bit higher. And then there's the park where the other teenagers are hanging out doing something else. There has not been that delineation online. A 10-year-old is treated the same as a 30-year-old. And we just kind of all agreed to let that be the case. And I think 20 years into this, states, governments around the world have kind of stopped waiting for the industry to do better, to police itself, to make big changes. And now, now they're just making them for them. They're just saying, you know what, outright ban. You know what, we're taking you to court. So there has just been this shift, I think this kind of collective awakening that, we need to do this differently. But, this is, as I said, this is not the end of the story. It's kind of the beginning in terms of like the reckoning that is to come for the social media industry.
And do you think that this could be existential for them, or at least sort of incredibly humbling in terms of their size and the size of their balance sheets as well? I mean, could this really undercut what they do?
Yes and no. So the reason I'm a bit circumspect on that is because, if you look at big tobacco is still big. Like people smoke less, but now they vape. And now they have the pouches. We've figured out a different delivery mechanism for the same product that is maybe a little bit less bad, right? But these companies aren't going to go away. Facebook's apps, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, are used by more than 3 billion people, right? That is like roughly half of the internet going public of the planet outside China, where it's not allowed. This is a utility. It's not just going to disappear. But I do think they're going to be forced to change some of the way these core products operate. And for them, going back to that open letter that they wrote to YouTube and TikTok, I think that the calculus is a little bit realpolitik of like, as long as we all move in step, we're all going to be okay. They just don't want to be the outlier where all of a sudden their apps aren't as sticky. They're not as addictive, but others are. And then they, lose market share. That's a very cynical way to put it, but I think that's also a big factor at play.
Just finally, Danny, this is all very well for teenagers, and it's great for them if these changes are coming just in the US or around the world to make these apps less addictive, to restrict the amount of time they're on them. I mean, I'd like that as well. Adults surely would benefit from this. Are we just all going to be using the really addictive, arguably unsafe in some circumstances, versions of these apps while just teenagers are protected? I mean, sure, there must be a movement to have some of these restrictions and tweaks rolled out to all of us.
You would think, but I think we can't expect to boil the ocean at this first go. And I think in a way it's appropriate. We start with our most vulnerable. We start with kids. I mean, we've all been teenagers. I'm old enough to have grown up without social media. And I'm glad I was, because I would not have liked to have had a place where I can instantly and constantly compare myself to other folks in those awkward years. But I do think, to your point, I think we will move up the stack, as it were, and eventually a lot of these changes will get propagated through the whole system. Because my guess, and who knows, again, this will be all about the implementation and how much teeth there is to it. But I think if we start to see some of these changes actually affect, in a positive way, how people interact with social media, the next logical step would be, well, maybe we should just do that for everyone. So that is a hopeful kind of, perhaps a hopeful way to end it, is maybe this is the beginning of a new era of social media that's maybe just a teeny bit more healthy for all of us.
Danny Forston, US West Coast correspondent for the Sunday Times. If you want to hear more about the trial, you can listen to Danny and the Times' Katie Prescott over on the Times Tech podcast. This week's episode has already dropped. The story at thetimes.com is our email address if you want to get in touch, but for today, that is it from us. Our producers were Sophie McNulty and Jennifer Kennedy. The executive producer was Edward Drummond. Sound design was by Dave Creasy, and theme composition was by Mauro Seto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.